And he's gone. We were in the green room talking, and now he disappeared.
Perfect timing.
Perfect timing, exactly. So I do apologise, but here we are. Good afternoon, Ozpol. Denise Shrivell here. Very pleased to be joining you on this Tuesday afternoon. We're really looking forward to a great chat. And this afternoon, I'm very pleased to be joined by, until quite recently, Greens Senator Andrew Bartlett. Welcome to you, Andrew.
Yeah, g'day. Good to join you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who's joining us live, to also those that have popped in replay. Andrew, we really want to talk about some big issues. I'd like to get your reflection on the current state of play of Ozpol, but also maybe to reflect on some of your time in the Senate and what you thought were the key moments. But we would be a little remiss if we didn't pick up, first of all, on the news of the day. So, of course, quite early this morning, I was watching ABC News Breakfast, as I do most mornings, and we're saying we've lost me. I can still see me. I'm not sure what's going on there.
Seems clear to me.
Seems clear to me too. We'll just keep going. Of course, came the news through that there has been some involvement with Morrison and the Australian government with Trump. Yeah, everyone can hear me. Anyway, we'll go on. There has been some involvement with Morrison, perhaps now approaching the Trump administration, saying that they would help with any aid that was needed in the Mueller investigation. Andrew, you've said you've been working today, but what can you offer on the breaking news of the day?
Oh, look, I mean, I think it's all just part of the rolling absurdity of, how badly politics is degraded in the US and Australia. I mean, in one sense, I think it's just one further example of Australia that's basically being a client state of the US. It's more and more obvious. To me, I think the bigger problems is our acquiescence to whatever the US wants to do in foreign policy, what they're looking at doing and potentially in response to Iran, our total intertwining with UN military policy, I think, is the bigger danger. And this fact that we're just, so openly kowtow in all sorts of other ways is just a consequence of that, I guess.
Yes, and of course, coming off the back of the state visit in the last week, really, it does seem sort of curious timing, and perhaps, as some commentators were saying, perhaps also speaks to the reception that Morrison received over there, from the state dinner to the obviously closeness of the relationship. Concerning. The whole thing's just so concerning when you know what Trump is like, and anyone who's been following him.
Well, it's that problem, I think, once Trump became president, and people always assumed he was a pariah, but by virtue of becoming president, it just becomes normalised. And as we've seen with so many of the people in US politics who condemned Trump, that once he was there, people just coalesce around where the power is and they normalise it and they validate it. And they basically, in a sense, end up reinforcing and promoting it. And that, to me, is another broader problem with the Australian Prime Minister's visit to the US. Not so much the state dinner, that's all what happens, I suppose, but, basically participated in what was a quasi-campaign rally for Donald Trump. And, I'd like to think most Australians still think Donald Trump's not sort of thing we want to look for in terms of political leadership, and the sort of approach to civic engagement and politics more broadly that we really need to be shunning rather than praising, which is basically what our Prime Minister did.
Yes, that's exactly right. I'm getting some word that they haven't got me. I'm not too sure what's going on there. Can you hear me? If you can't see me, but Andrew can see me, I can see me on the screen, so I'm not too sure what's going on. We will persist. Yes, obviously concerning. What's your feeling too on the whole impeachment thing?
Oh, look, and maybe I'll just repeat just in case some people can't hear you, but in terms of your question about the impeachment thing, Look, I mean, there's going to be an election next year in the US anyway, and I think that's be the big test, really. I mean, politics is so poisoned in so many countries, including the US, and the US has the added disadvantage of basically having an electoral system and a political system that, frankly, barely meets the benchmark of a functional democracy. It's so distorted and perverted. Their voting system's a disgrace. There's no independent electoral analysis. The running of elections is politicised. The gerrymanders galore. The role of money is just so distorting and corrupting. It's, as I say, it barely qualifies as a democracy. So in that sense, there's a real danger, I think, that the impeachment thing will just be another piece of theatre, even though it's certainly a valid area of concern. But again, I think there's many other areas and activities of this administration in the US that are far worse. But it's a political process, dressed up as a judicial one, I guess. And my main view of it is whilst it's important in some degrees, I fear it will distort and distract from issues that are of much more significance and harming many people's lives directly, as well as, of course, the ongoing winding back of even the environmental regulations that were in place are being wound back. Obviously, the contempt for any action on climate change is enormous, so the damage being done there is huge, and I don't think that's going to change regardless of impeachment. So to me, the big issue is still the election next year and the issues that get put forward. And given the nature of their electoral system, and you're basically stuck with him or whoever the Democrats put forward, then key thing will be whether the Democrats put forward a credible alternative or just an establishment figure again.
Yeah, it is going to be really interesting to see who they put up. And I agree with you. Huge concerns over obviously the way that he was elected. There does seem to be ongoing discussion about that. Interestingly, you mentioned that, we're already going sort of down a different rabbit hole. I put in my submission into the parliamentary inquiry into our election this week. What were your views on how our election ran this year, back in May?
One of the key things for me, it's not going to be the panacea that'll fix everything, but I do think we should push ahead with trying to get some degree of truth in political advertising.
Yeah.
We do have it in South Australia. It's not going to fix everything, and I don't think people should get too hopeful about, getting a sudden outburst of purity of motives and truth permeating everybody's pronouncements, but at least some constraint and some recognition that blatant lies shouldn't be part of the system. That's a key thing for me. And on top of that, I think the key issue again is, there's a lot of smaller things that I think are important that I'd love to see. There's talk in Queensland here of getting rid of the morass of gigantic reams and reams of plastic banners that go up everywhere these days, and the oceans of plastic and the mountains of corflutes and signage. I'd like to see constraints on that. But the other big one is political donation reform. And there's been talk about that again. Obviously, no interest from the coalition. They've stymied it every step of the way for quite a long time now. But if we could get constraints on donations and caps on political expenditure, then that would be a big gain as well.
Yes, but my submission certainly spoke quite a lot about political advertising. The lies told also was a real theme that I picked up on. It was, and I agree, the amount of money that's political donations, of course, another big thing. I think that we have to accept, even though they've called this inquiry, the current government is benefiting from the status quo. We'll see what happens. Jenny, Jenny, can you hear me if you can't see me? Obviously not. I don't know what's going on. You can see me. I'm not too sure. Anyway, let's persist. Give us an idea of what you're doing now, Andrew. First of all, you're in the Senate from, I didn't know this actually, you were a Queensland Senator for the Democrats from 1997 to 2008, and again for the Greens in 2017 to 2018, where you took Larissa Waters' spot when, of course, she was found on the S44, and then stood aside when she came back in. really interested in hearing what you're doing now.
I guess in terms of what I'm doing now, I'm trying to do stuff as removed from party politics as I can. I think everything's political, so I don't say I'm disengaging from politics, but I'm disengaging from party politics for a while,
Yep.
electoral politics, if you like. I'm basically trying to set up a cafe in Fortitude Valley in Queensland. Probably can't see that, but it's trying a bit of subliminal advertising. Shadow Play Tea House, it's called. Look it up on Facebook. Just trying to get a cafe and a bit of a craft and community space, a small place for people to get together, to chat, to have meetings, to talk over knitting and drawing and painting, as well as the usual food and drink and stuff. Bit of plant-based food, gluten-free food. In the valley, which is an area I've hung around in for many, many years. I'm also involved still, and stayed involved actually even when my time when I was back in the Senate with community radio station in Brisbane, 4ZZZ. I've been on the board there for about 8 years. Just keeping that going. I used to be involved with that back in the 1980s as well, when it was a young community radio station, and got re-engaged after I left the Senate the first time. So the local music scene, local activists and advocacy and campaigners and creative scene, I guess, at that sort of independent level. So Fortitude Valley's a hub for all that, so I thought I may as well hang out here more often and see if I could set up a cafe and a bit of a meeting space that people could use.
Good.
So still getting that working.
Very good. And still talking about some issues?
Oh, yes. I mean, it never goes away. I'm still engaged with all that. I mean, I often say, and have for many years, when people ask about involvement in politics, to reinforce that politics isn't just about parliament or political parties or elections. They obviously are very important, but there's a million different ways that people engage with political issues for all sorts of reasons. There's a lot about electoral politics, particularly these days, and party politics that's very distasteful, and people quite understandably don't want to engage and immerse themselves in that. But it is important, so I kept staying involved with it, despite its less than savoury aspects. But I'll, encouraging people to just connect on issues that concern them, whether it's an individual issue that they're passionate about, or empowering the community and making people realise that they can make a difference, and that there are other people that share their concerns, and connecting them together in different ways. It's something I always have an interest in and are passionate about, and I guess I've always found it disappointing that Parliament and political parties in general really don't make the most of the opportunities to empower the community. It's not surprisingly, but still disappointingly, still mostly about people grabbing power for themselves and their bunch of people, and running with the trust us, we'll do better than the other lot. And obviously some people do better than other people, but I think it would all work better if there was more capacity to really connect and involve the community more meaningfully in issues that concern them, particularly those that are more powerless, that are poorer, that are disengaged, that are disadvantaged for all sorts of reasons. They're really locked out of the system, and there's still not really many efforts to change that.
And of course, we saw a terrific example 2 weeks ago, certainly in Sydney. I'm sure it was the same in Brisbane with the climate change, with the climate strike. To attend that? Yes,
yeah, it was huge. It was really inspirational. And I mean, I think like a lot of people that have views that would broadly be described as progressive, there's a lot of despair, I think is a reasonable word, about the federal election result overall, and regrouping and how we can fight back, particularly on the destruction of the planet and the contempt, deliberate sabotaging of efforts to reduce carbon emissions, and to have that wave of energy, and to have young people at the front of it. And as you mentioned earlier on, I've been involved in Parliament and politics, party politics, for a long time. I was first in Parliament in 1997, and indeed before that worked as a staffer for Cheryl Kernow, as people may remember, when she first started. Yes, so she started out in 1990, so it goes back a fair way, and even before that on other issues. So seen a lot of things over the years, and the biggest rally by a long shot in my lifetime was the Iraq War. rally in 2003. And, you know, the number of times whenever I mention that and people say, yeah, well, the government still ignored us, which they did, you know, and even though the mob, as John Howard contemptuously dismissed us as, have been proven to be right a million times over, and John Howard was clearly massively wrong in supporting that horrendous illegal war and invasion in Iraq. He still went ahead. That big rally wasn't able to stop that, and indeed he never really got politically punished for it, in my view. But, you know, I think it's a reminder that a big rally on its own doesn't change a lot. It's got to be connected into a whole range of other actions. And, you know, this one, of course, as people know, the school strike for climate wasn't the first one. It's building. This one was bigger than the previous ones. And there's a whole lot of actions around it, and, you know, continuing smaller meetings and gatherings and talks about, well, what else can we do? So it's you know, so that myth that you can all just have a really big rally and the government will go, oh, gee whiz, we better do something, doesn't work like that, and it never really has. But it does show the strength of force that's there. It's almost like a coming together. I don't think I'd quite use the celebration as the right word, but an affirmation of the enormity of the public commitment to this, and, you know, for young people in particular, who are so often dismissed as not caring about anybody else and not caring about the community, and, you know, actually have so much more challenges to face than when I was that age, particularly as you're moving into university and all of the costs and all of the difficulties with the employment market and housing costs and job insecurity and all of these things. It's actually, I think, even more laudatory for younger people to be contributing and to be putting themselves forward and to take that time and showing that commitment and following through on it in such a significant way. And that's a reminder and a reinforcement. It wasn't just all of them turning up on that one day and then going back home. I know so many of them are continuing to look at what they can do and build that pressure, and that does give hope, but it, you know, that doesn't, you know, I don't want to sound too starry-eyed. You're up against some really big forces here who are obviously resisting very, very strongly any change, any meaningful change, and there's a lot of work to do. And at a federal level, I guess, you know, it's 2.5 years to the next federal election. It's a long time to keep building that pressure. I'm not saying nothing can be done between now and then other than kicking this government out, but building that momentum for significant change and getting all of the parties outside of the government to prioritise, you know, strong action on climate, which, you know, I think particularly in Queensland here, where we've got the state government, state Labor government, post-election, sadly, really strongly affirming categorically their support for moving the Adani coal mine ahead and continuing to issue exploration licences for coal, thermal coal in central Queensland. That, you know, there's a long way to go to turn things around at state level as well here.
Exactly. I just want to pick up on your point about John Howard, and you're right. I don't think he's ever actually been held to account for that, and he's not held to account now. It really frustrates, I think, a lot of us, and I see comment on this on Twitter quite often, that he's not, when he's interviewed now, he's not held to account. It's really frustrating when we know that the actions, you know, basically those protesters, those hundreds of thousands of protesters back then were spot on in what they were saying. They were ignored, and Howard is still not held to account when he's interviewed now. It's really frustrating. He's kind of held up as his elder statesman, which I think is wrong. The point that you raised on Queensland, and I know some of us seem really confused about what the Queensland state Labor government is doing. This week, even Anastasia Palaszczuk came out very, you know, forward about climate change. But then all of us know that you can't be forward on climate change if you're also promoting Adani. But as you also know, it's not Adani, it's actually the Galilee Basin. So it's the 6 thermal coal mines that are being set up in the Galilee Basin by the likes of Palmer and Gina Rinehart. What do you think is going on there? I mean, I sort of thought she's not speaking to us who know what's going on. She's speaking to people who aren't questioning their actual climate change credentials. But there's a conflict.
Yeah, look, I'll try and be as non-partisan possible. I mean, obviously, having just been in the Senate for the Greens and run for the federal election for the House of Reps, and we've got a swing in the seat I'm sitting in at the moment in central Brisbane. There's a lot I could say to express my extreme displeasure at the state government on this, but I guess to just try and analyse a bit more dispassionately what's going on. Why the hell are they doing this? And we did see this federally as well. I mean, I saw a comment here on the thread of somebody talking about Queensland being backward, and if you pardon me for being slightly sensitive to that sort of thing, because I think there's things each of us can say about people in all states. Queensland's a very diverse state. There's very strong opposition in the southeast corner of the state to more coal mines being opened up. But I do think for people in central and northern Queensland, a lot of areas that do have, firstly, significant problems, not all of those areas, but significant parts of them have real problems with unemployment rates and economic viability of their families. And they also have a strong cultural history. I note there, Jenny, you're a northern Queenslander, or you can... happy to take your comment there. I think that there is a difference, when I was in the Senate travelling around the state, there's, politicians always have play on this. Queenslanders play on Southerners not telling us what to do. North Queenslanders say we're not going to be told what to do by South Queensland. There's a strong, history and identity in not all of northern and central Queensland, but certainly in parts of it that, mining is part of who we are, and they're trying to take away our lifestyle, and they don't value what we do and all this sort of thing. And I do feel not enough has been done. And I'd say this particular state government, I know it's not easy. I mean, it is difficult to appeal to voters on this issue in central and northern Queensland and also in southeast Queensland. And I think Labor at state level and federally tried to walk both sides of the street. And, politically, ended up really dissatisfying people on all sides of the argument. And one thing that is an ongoing problem, and I think, whilst the Greens have good policies in this area, I think the Greens also can do more to really prioritise the fact that there is an economic pathway for those regions. There's economic viability in other mining, there's economic viability in other jobs in those regions that transition to a clean energy future. And the state government, even if they said, look, this mine's got to go ahead, but we've also got a plan to move away rapidly from coal in a way that will not disadvantage these communities. But they've never really said that. It's always just been this black and white. You're either for Adani or you're against it. It's actually frustrating because there's a lot of jobs happening right now, including in regional Queensland, in fact, especially in regional Queensland, around renewable energy. And that's before they have the extra investment that should be taking place to enable an export industry in regards to renewable energy and clean energy. And if that was prioritised and sold for the people of those regions, that their economic future is being looked after and planned for, and that transition is being planned for, and that work had been done, I think the situation could have been different. But instead, it's just come down to that really simplistic, polarised, pro or anti-Adani, pro or anti-jobs, that same old paradigm that is, things often get trapped in. And I think the state government just never figured out a way to navigate it, and now they're really paying the price. And they clearly decided post-election, federal election, to just go, okay, no more both sides of the street, we're just pro-Adani. Even that, if they could be also promoting a strong transition policy beyond just general statements about climate change being important, perhaps they could get somewhere, but they're just not doing that. And as far as I'm aware, they don't have that plan. I certainly haven't seen any significant sign of it. So to me, that's what they need to be doing. But they do give a lot of the signs of fraying pretty significantly here in Queensland, the state Labor government, which is a worry. I mean, it presents opportunities for the Greens in a few key seats where we came close last time. But, it also opens up the risk of LNP getting back into power, and sure as hell don't want that. It's not that long ago they were in power in Queensland, and we could see they had did a lot of damage in 3 years, and since then we've had a referendum where they now get 4 years, so they get an extra year to do even more damage if they get back in. So that's a real danger, and that election's coming up October next year. So, or is it end of September? I can't remember. end of October, I think. Anyway, it's 12 months away, basically. So it's a bit of a crunch time at Queensland level coming up soon.
It does seem a really curious tactic, doesn't it, that they can't quite work out how to navigate through this issue. We often speak about the one media town, particularly in those regional Queensland seats where mining job and fossil fuel jobs are so prevalent. What impact do you think having a very pro-thermal coal, pro-Adani, Murdoch media dominant presence in those regions has, who are obviously coming out very anti-Labor, very pro-mining?
Oh, it's huge. I mean, and, the commenter here, Jenny, is from Northern Queensland, could talk about their, better than I, but I hesitate to always sound like there was this golden era where we had these perfectly dispassionate media outlets that never were biased. It's always, media proprietors have always tilted the media in their own interests, but it's just off the charts these days. It's just so over the top. And, it's not just Central Queensland. Of course, Brisbane, all we have is the Courier Mail, and it is appalling. I mean, it's just, it's hard to describe sometimes just how absurdly off the planet its narrative is. And look, in one sense, their power is reducing. Fewer people read them, fewer people take it seriously. But, the media is its own little bubble, and they still follow what each other say. So it does influence the narrative a lot. And amongst the few people that do still read the stuff are the politicians and their advisors and all that. So they still react, I think, more than they should sometimes. That's easy to say, hard to do occasionally, but particularly in the north, it does get, it's really quite strident and quite aggressive. So, speaking out against that, and I know when I went through Rockhampton and Mackay a year or so back and talked to a range of people, and, quite a few people said to me who were not activists, who were small business people and others, and say, look, I think Adani's crazy, it's not viable. In Rockhampton, their council there, they desperately need money put in to improve the infrastructure in their local airport, and instead the council was spending money on an airstrip miles away from Rockhampton purely to try and encourage Adani to promise some jobs that will probably never appear to be based in Rockhampton. So people are saying this is, it's stupid, it's distorting our economy, it's not going to deliver anything like what people are saying it is. We've got to diversify, we've got to move away from this, but they're not going to stick their heads up because it's a bad, particularly if you're in business, you don't, it's not a good career move, basically. So, there's a lot of that broader social pressure, and it does feel like that social narrative has really bitten in those regions, and that's tough to counter. And, it's easy for me to say the state government should be doing a lot more. Speaking as the Greens, we say what we can in those areas, but we're not strong in those areas. I have a massive admiration for the activists and the Greens candidates and other activists outside of party politics who put their head up in those communities, because it's, at least in some areas, a lot more confronting. So, part of what I see as our role in southern areas is to reinforce and support and give space for the voices from those communities to show that there is not just people opposing thermal coal mines, but there are people developing and other economic alternatives for those areas, as well as, of course, those existing jobs, particularly in tourism, that are being put at risk by rapid climate change, most obviously, but not only, with the threats to the Barrier Reef Marine Park.
I think it's interesting that one of the calls for the climate change strikes, I think they've got 3 points that they're calling for, 100% transition to renewables. Obviously, I think 100% by 2030 is one of them. I can't recall the other one, but the third one is transition for workers in these thermal coal mining areas. So they've very much got these people in mind. And to me, you're right. We absolutely have to make them very front of mind in any sort of call we have in this issue. And there's no blame for them at all. Of course, they're concerned about their jobs and their livelihoods and their families and what they're going to do in their futures. But it does feel like that those fears and those vulnerabilities have been very exploited by those that can only benefit from it. And of course, that's those in the thermal mining sector, in the coal sector.
Oh, absolutely. You know, they're big corporate donors to both the largest political parties and the coalition in particular. So, you know, there's vested interests there, and they're doing quite well out of it. Thank you. It's not going to deliver for those communities long term, and you know, that's a tragedy for the economic viability and the social strength of those communities. But you know, as many of us know, a lot of how people vote is about identity and emotion, rather than just, you know, cold rational judgment of pages and pages of policies. So people have got to be demonstrating that those pathways are there. And you know, it's obviously been done before, and whilst I didn't support a lot of what the Hawke-Keating government did with industry adjustments and overdoing the neoliberal agenda in a big time, they did, at least in some of those areas that were hard hit, like manufacturing, you know, have transition plans and have support packages and all of those sorts of things. And in this area, in regional Queensland, you know, you don't have to, you know, be particularly left field. Those opportunities for transition are clearly there, and clearly detailed in the material that Adam Bant, for example, produced prior to the election, detailed that at great depth, including transition support and worker support and retraining and using existing skills in similar types of projects that related to clean energy and mine rehabilitation. There's plenty of opportunities there that are, you know, already quite aligned with existing jobs and skills in those regions, and with investment behind them, and with government packages like the Renewable Energy Investment Agency and the like. So it's actually quite, I mean, it's not simple in the sense there's a lot that needs to be done, but it's simple in the sense it's clearly viable and tenable and doesn't rely on, you know, technology that hasn't been invented yet or anything like that. The possibility and the ability to do it is very clear, and the economic opportunities are very clear, as are, you know, the obvious evidence about the dangers to existing jobs and the extra costs. And we all, you know, in the last while, and I'm sure we'll be talking about it more and more, the damage and the costs done by